do this. I don't know why Twitter's not working, but I have to live without it.
Yep, bees like that sometimes.
Hey guys, this is Bruce. Welcome to ConvoCourses podcast, and today I have the honor of speaking with Will Reed, who is an entrepreneur, a cybersecurity coach, a speaker, and he's the host of Tech in Motion podcast. He's the CEO of BetterEverydayCyber.com. Please introduce yourself, sir. It's an honor for me. I'm glad I got to meet you. I have so many questions that I want to ask, and I want to learn from you as well. So please introduce yourself and talk to us about your business.
Awesome. I appreciate it, Bruce. And just before I get rolling, I just want to say the honor's all mine. I've been following you for a while. And like we mentioned before, you're one of the resources that I found when I was just breaking into pure GRC work, and all of the tools, all of the talks, YouTube videos that you had out there were really a blessing to me. So I just want to thank you in front of your audience as well, just like I did to you when we first jumped on. So a little bit about myself. I don't know if I could do much better than Bruce did, but so I'm an Army veteran, 20 years in the Army, similar background on the military side to Bruce. And I ended up breaking into cyber while I was an IT services manager. And what I did was part of my role was to be an IT director as well. And I managed all aspects of IT. And part of that was information assurance is what we called it in the military. And that was my initial break into cybersecurity. Once I retired, I ended up going to a purely cybersecurity GRC role with the TSA, supporting a TSA contract, doing compliance work. And then I did the same thing for the Secret Service, and then eventually broke into the private sector, supporting small and mid-sized businesses. And then from there, ended up starting my own company. So that's it, long and short of it.
Wow. Yeah, I've been looking through your resume, man. I checked out your LinkedIn, and I'm like, damn, okay. I'm about to get outshined on this one.
Oh, no, it looks a lot more sexy than it really was. You start saying things like Secret Service, and they're thinking I'm like, hiding behind the president and working on his information systems and all that. Like, I wasn't doing that. I was doing paperwork, man.
And for you guys who are looking for, I get questions all the time about people wanting to have me as a coach or a mentor, and I just don't have time to do it. But Will Reed does. So his link is in the description below. Go check out his services. And my first question, you're really strong in security management. And my question is, for us who are aspiring to get into that role, what are some of the skills that you need that you need to do information security management work?
Yeah, great question. I believe that one of the first and foremost things you got to have is great communication skills, because when you're doing security management and it's not as deeply technical as some of the other IT roles out there, especially when you start talking about like security engineer, where you're deep into configurations on a firewall or a router or a switch or something like that. Security management is more about the bigger picture and making sure all of the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed, looking at your entire security program as a whole, and then managing the different aspects of it. And so communication is very key, because you're not hands-on, you have to negotiate, you have to talk, you have to communicate with other stakeholders that are actually doing the work, number one. And then number two, communicating with the C-suite and the executives that are actually running the business or running the organization. So being able to translate tech speak to business speak from a communication perspective is very, very key. I'll say number one. Number two, as a security manager, is having the skills to be able to run multiple different projects at the same time, and be able to keep schedules, keep things on a good time, make sure that everybody that needs to be in communication is talking, bringing people in. I love last week when you started talking about this, when you were talking about configuration management and looking at project management. So a lot of this security management, project management is a big piece of it, bringing the full picture together and making sure your projects, all the different tasks and responsibilities and everybody that's involved is all singing the same song. So I'll say those two big things. And then the last thing I'll say is just looking at things in layers. So when you're looking at security, you're not just looking at one aspect of security, like physical or just network security. You're looking at what we used to call defense in depth. Now we're starting to go a little bit deeper, to go into zero trust. But ultimately, it's looking at all the different aspects of security, from even the personnel side when you're looking at security awareness and people clicking on the wrong things in their emails, right? So understanding security in layers is the last thing I'll bring about. So understanding how to communicate those different risks, how to manage those different technologies, and then how to leverage your communication skills between different stakeholders, talking about different technologies are the key things that I would highlight.
I love what you said about defense in depth and looking at the big picture. That's so true. But I know as a manager, one of the things you have to deal with is difficult people. And that's been one of my challenges. Every every department, every agency, every place I've been to, I have to deal with either it's a coworker
Mm-hmm.
or it's a peer or it's a C-level exec, it's a manager, sometimes it's the customer.
Yeah.
How do you deal with difficult people? This is a question I get on almost every interview, and if they don't bring it up, I'll bring it up.
Yeah.
But how do you deal with it, Will?
That's an excellent question, Bruce. And really, it comes to having what I call like just emotional intelligence, both of yourself and of other people's. And when I say that emotional intelligence for yourself, number one is understanding what triggers you when it comes to communication. One of the things that I found was, and I'll give you just a quick backstory. When I was in the military, so I was deployed. I was in Afghanistan, and I was the IT services director, IT manager over for our section, right?
What year
And
were you there?
so Afghanistan. I was 2014 through 2016,
Okay,
two
okay.
separate deployments.
All
But
right.
but yeah, it was 2014 to 2016 is when I was in Afghanistan.
Okay.
So as part of my role, I managed the primary help desk for our systems, but we also had to leverage third parties. Like for example, the DIA was managing a portion of our network, and so they were the primary responders for things. We would do the initial kind of just real quick triage, but if we couldn't handle anything, just like it was really minor stuff, we were really just the ones that got on the phone with them, like, hey, you need to come down here and fix this. So I was out. I actually got notified the day before that there was a major system that we were also supporting, or that we were potentially going to have to support. And I was going to do a recon with the actual manager of that site to see if we could help them out. And so while I was gone, that network that the DIA supported went down completely. So this network also controlled an email platform as well. So when I got back, I walked in and they were like, hey, like the boss needs to see you. So I go in there and he's like, where are you? It's like I was doing exactly what you told me to do. I was going to make sure that we could figure out how we needed to support that other site. He is like, well, the JWIX is down. Yes, I understand. The DIA, I saw the rep. He's walking around trying to make sure that everything is right. And he's trying to get a gauge of the situation. So I know they're working on it. He's like, well, where were you? It's like, again, I was out, and this is where, like, if you're familiar with Afghanistan, a lot of
Yeah.
people, you just don't have your own vehicle. A lot of times you just have to walk
Yeah.
places. So
Yeah.
I had to walk, about a mile or mile and a half down the road in order to get to where I needed to go. So it took me a while to get there and a while to get back. And he was like, well, like, why were you gone so long? I was like, I had to walk. And he's like, oh, we got a vehicle. Like, I didn't know that. Matter of fact, this is I ended up getting there. This is probably like a week after I got there. They got there a little bit ahead of me, and so I had one of my guys that was the lead on there, so he was managing things. And so when I got there, this is about a week later. I didn't know there was a vehicle on standby that could have been
Right.
used.
Right.
So I was like, okay, hey, I'll take that. So, but he was like, yeah, like I couldn't send this email. I was like, I'm tracking, but if I was here, we would still have this problem right now. I promise you, because I don't manage this network. The DIA person who is actually here, they manage it. So, but yeah, he was like, yeah, get the F out of my office. And I was like, okay, all right, cool. So if anybody knows the military, I was in the military. If anybody knows the military, that's
Army.
Profanity is the first language. The second language is English, right? So, that experience taught me, and it conditioned me to really, really be a stickler for things that are under my control. If you're going to hold me accountable for something, hold me accountable for the things that are under my control. So anytime there is an issue where it involves somebody else, then I'm going to be like, okay, let's identify whose responsibility that is. And I will help you get in contact with this person. We can work through this. But when that's a trigger for me. So I know if that happens to me, I'll get hot initially. And so knowing that about myself, I have to really take a pause, count to 3, just kind of realize, okay, they really don't know whose responsibility is. And because I'm the initial point of contact, I'm going to get all the heat rounds right out the gate. So that's understanding that about myself. And then understanding people from an emotional perspective. When things go wrong and you can't do the things that you normally can do on your system, on your computer, on your devices, it's frustrating. So when people come to us, and especially when you're in an IT role or you're in a security role, talking about incident management, when there's an incident that happens and now you found a ransomware note, like people are going to panic. And then when people panic, they get emotional. And when they get emotional, all of the different filters that they did have where they would input niceness and they would input empathy and all of that stuff, that goes out the window and it's full panic mode. The house is on fire, grab everything, women and children, throw everybody out the house, run out, and then go screaming and then call for help, right? So understanding that when people are in trouble, when people are confused, when they can't do what they want to do, when they can't do what they normally can do, then they're going to be emotional about it. So dealing with people, I think number one is emotional intelligence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you nailed it. It's that emotional intelligence for knowing yourself, knowing your triggers, just like you said, to summarize, and then knowing how people are going to respond. Know thyself. And you've got to be true with yourself. To thine own self be true. I think this Shakespeare said that. It's super important in cybersecurity, and I don't think people talk about it enough because it's been the most difficult part. The technical part is I just haven't enough exposure to where I can figure it out. But the emotional aspect of it has been very challenging. It's just like you said, what I've done to center myself, just like yourself, is just to know myself and know what triggers me and then calm myself down because it happens. You get in a meeting, it happens, and you just got to calm. You know that's coming, or if it does, you know to make an adjustment emotionally.
Right. Yeah, that gets into the art versus the science. Like the technology, all of the policies, the frameworks, all the legalities, all the regulations that you have to abide by. That's the science. That stuff is really pretty cut and dry when it comes down. It might be deeply technical. It might take a while to understand. But that stuff, it either works or it doesn't work. It's either a policy or it's not a policy. It's either a requirement or it's not a requirement. The art comes into how you then negotiate how a business feels and reputation, and when it comes to like how this event is affecting the norm. So and then understanding how to deal with different types of personalities. Again, like I'll refer back to last week. When you're talking about technical people, it's the ones and the zeros. It's all the this is what it is. This is the server. This is the database. Active Directory is down and all that. I can't talk in that language when I go to the business, right? And I start talking to them technically, then they're going to get frustrated. And that's going to cause us to have a disconnect when it comes to communication. So the science is being able to translate that in a way for the business to actually make sense of things.
Absolutely. Nailed it. So, as you mentioned, you're a vet, retired Army. What has been the pros and cons between being in cyber in the civilian sector versus being in the government?
Yeah, I'll start on the military side. And one of the things that the benefits of being in the military is there's a lot of built-in structure.
Mm-hmm.
And the system, the DoD as a whole is like one of, if not the biggest spender of dollars for the American government.
Mm-hmm.
And they use those dollars to purchase technology and to purchase solutions. And so when it comes to having to do things, you're not doing a lot of things from scratch. So you're able to fall in on systems, you're able to fall in on processes. Military also has built-in leadership as well. So you know who's in charge, you know who's responsible for what. And then when you come in as a new person, especially if you're junior level, you fall into a manager that is going to be responsible for making sure that you understand exactly what's going on. Flip that over to the civilian side, and I'll talk on the contractor world. When I first jumped out, I was expected, because I was a senior in the military, and on paper I had CISSP, I had a network operations and security degree, and I had 20 years of experience, and then 10 years of that prior to was doing some form of information assurance. So they were like, hey, you're a senior level, so a lot of things they expected me to figure out on my own. When I went into the private side, we also had, and this is past the TSA and the Secret Service, when I was actually in the private sector, the first company that I was working for, they were pretty junior in their GRC program. So they were like, hey, like what tools and resources and documentation do you have from the TSA, the Secret Service, the Army? And I'm like, that was all on classified networks. I can't pull that stuff off and then use that here. That's highly illegal. And nor will I even try to do that. Although it helps to have all that. Like, it was in my head, but having to build those that documentation out from scratch was a challenge. The other side of it was dealing with small and mid-sized businesses. A lot of them don't have security programs at all, or if they do have something that's very informal. There's nothing documented on what they're doing. There are no, like they're doing things that are efficient and expedient, but not necessarily security compliant, right? And so when you come into organizations like that, and you're like, hey, well, where's your information security policy that tells me how the organization expects for the security program to run? They're like, we don't have a security policy. Well, or there's an incident, you come in like, hey, where's your incident response plan, so we can understand what you have already articulated as your strategy to deal with an incident. We don't have an incident response plan. So having to build some of that documentation from scratch, or even just the security program in general, having to come in that there's no risk assessment that's been done, so you don't know, where their risks lie. They don't have a good, a lot of them don't have good asset management, especially if they're digital assets and where their sensitive information is. So understanding where all of that is on the civilian side, that was pretty challenging, trying to build that stuff from scratch and identify that. And the military side, everything is very, very regimented. Everything is that you have the unclassified network for all the unclassified information. You got secret, and then you got top secret, and then you got even further caveats beyond that, where where your sensitive information is. And there's no question about it. And that's where I think some of the key differences that I've seen just off the top of my head.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So military, federal governments usually, well, not all federal government, but the DoD specifically has it has structure built in. You've got chain of command. You know where stuff is supposed to go. But in the private sector, sometimes, depending on the organization, they don't have it. You got to build it, So I agree with that. Another question, one question I get quite a bit from TikTok and from everywhere is WGU. And I noticed that you went to that school. So could you give me an honest take on WGU? I've heard good things about it, but I'm not an alumni from that school. Could you tell us a little bit about it and give us your opinion about it?
Yeah, I'd love to. I found WGU while I was still in the military. And this is another one of those benefits of being in the military, is I had my entire college education funded. A lot of it was funded by what we call tuition assistance. So the Army paid for your tuition for college in your degree pursuits. The other part was because I was in the military. Anybody that served in the military, and you start looking at your taxes, and because a lot of your income is tax, like it's tax free, or you get some allowances to where a lot of your income is not taxed. It looked like I was broke, so I qualified for the Pell Grant full on. So actually, when I was enrolled in college, I actually made money because they put Pell Grant on top of my tuition assistance. I usually got a couple $1,000s back every semester. Anyway, but so I found WGU because I was looking for solutions. And so just to kind of bring it back a little bit, when I was in the military, my job, so I was in the Army, And the Army has different, we'll call them different departments, right? And so one of the departments was called the Signal Corps, and they were responsible for all the IT for the Army. So anybody that had a computer system, some way, shape, or form, the Signal Corps, the Signal Department, handled the IT for that. I was in a unique position. I was part of the intelligence community, but I did an IT function. I did all those same functions that the Signal Corps did for the rest of the Army. I did that for the intelligence systems. Part of that was because it required a top secret clearance to work on intelligence systems, and not all the people that were part of the Signal Corps had top secret clearances, right? So because of that access, I had to provide all those IT services for the military intelligence community. That was good in the sense that I became a jack of all trades. My job, we had to do everything. So on the Signal side, everything was very, very compartmentalized, even in the Signal Corps. So you had some people that worked on the workstations and the servers, other people that worked on the routers and switches, other people that worked on the SATCOM systems, right? And the other people that worked on the radios. So each one of them had very specific training, very specific skills, very specific job roles where that's where they function. For me, we had to do all of that as one skill set, right? Like that, we had to do all of it. So that term, jack of all trades, master of none, in a lot of senses, that's what I was. There are certain job roles or where you would show up in certain spots, certain locations, installations, where you would be a little bit more compartmentalized based off the systems you were supported. But in a broad sense, we supported everything. The challenge was when we went to our what we call professional military education. So periodically, as you progress up in the ranks, and when you get promoted, you go to additional training to teach you how to function better as a leader, as a manager, as a technician within that role. Well, most of my training after my initial training was really geared around intelligence work, not IT work. So when it came to getting deep, in depth, or highly technical training, there was a big gap in that, and I recognized that, and I recognized my own deficiencies where we had issues where, like, again, I mentioned the Signal Corps. They had people that work specifically on routers and switches. So those are the things that connect all your workstations and your internet, make sure everything is all communicating effectively.
Right.
We had our own switches that we had to manage, but we didn't have very, very in-depth training on how to manage those switches, how to get them configured properly. So when we would take our systems and have to get those connected with the rest of the Army's system or the rest of the intelligence community, we had to go through the Signal community and connect to their network infrastructure. And there are a lot of times, because our stuff was not configured the way theirs were, there were some issues with being able to get everything synchronized, everything communicating properly and connected properly. With that being said, I knew that I had to go and use other means in order to get that training. Enter Western Governors University. So they have a very, very good IT program, and they're an online university. They're self-paced, which means when you get their degree plan, you get it in 6-month chunks. And as long as you're doing at least 12, they don't use semester hours, they use competency units, which is basically it correlates the same, but the goal is to be able to get an understanding of the courseware, not necessarily take a written exam, but actually be able to do what the courseware is describing to you. So establish and recognize and validate your competency. So 12 competency units over a course of 6 months. You can do that as quickly as a couple of weeks, or you can take the full 6 months to do that. So that was one benefit of being in Western Governors University. Now, getting to the technical side, one of their IT degree plans was network operations and security. Within that, they had the certifications, which were Cisco Certified Network Administrator, or Network Associate. And then back then, when I took it, that's when the associate certifications for Cisco were still broken out. So you had CCNA security, you had
they changed it.
CCNA route and switch, you had CCNA wireless. So they did CCNA route and switch, and then they did CCNA security as part of the degree plan. So with that, I learned how to configure switches, configure routers, configure network protocols, and all of that, right? And learn how to interconnect devices. And so that was one of the benefits that I found, because I had to connect that gap, because I knew I wasn't going to get it as part of my normal IT technical training as part of my career field. So that was one of the things that Western Governors University helped me out at. And again, just to kind of really touch base on that competency unit, you can go through other colleges, because I think they were my fourth college I had gone to. I kind of did some college hopping here and there when I was in the military, but I landed on Western Governors University. But one of the key things was you couldn't just memorize a bunch of book answers. There were practical exercises. Like in order for me to graduate for those courses that were around network operations, it was go take the CCNA route and switch certification. Send us the confirmation that you passed the exam, and then that's going to give you the course credit, right?
Damn, that's
then
nice.
There's another programming and scripting courses, like so that you had to build out a script based off of an objective. It needs to accomplish these 6 tasks, and you had to hit each one of those 6 tasks. It wasn't just I hit 5 out of 6, and overall I had 100 in those 5, and then I missed that 6th one, so I had an 83 overall. There was no 83 overall. Like there was just either pass or fail. You either pass all of them or you failed, and you had to go back and cycle back through. So I love that aspect of it. The last aspect I'll say about it is they have a mentorship program built into it, to where when you pick your degree, your overall degree has a mentor, and that's your mentor that goes with you over the course of your entire degree. And so if I picked a network and operations security, so somebody that was familiar with networking in a broad sense was mentoring me along every single course and giving me an overview of like, hey, and he was helping me structure. You had the flexibility to pull some classes in certain time frames, and you had the flexibility to move some things around. I'm sorry, I'm sitting there like moving my hand, and I'm like blocking.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
I talk with my hands if anybody didn't notice. So that mentor walked with you through the entire degree program and provided recommendations, resources, other students that have been through similar things, and like, hey, these are the challenges that they had. Here's some recommendations that you can do. Then each individual course had its own instructor and mentor that was able to provide specific insights into how to pass that course, how to understand the material, other resources within that specific course where that you could utilize that could also help cement that knowledge. So my experience with WGU was amazing. I loved my mentor that walked me through the degree program. I interfaced with some of the course mentors, and they were great when I did engage them. But for the most part, the courseware was pretty self-explanatory. There were a couple, hiccups, but they were very good at giving me resources when I had some challenges. And so at the end of it, I felt like I was better prepared to not only implement what I learned, but also like I was able to implement what I learned immediately while I was in, like before I even got out of the degree program. Like I got those certifications, which was valuable. I got the certifications before I finished the degree. I think I ended up with 7 or 8 certifications before I ended up with my degree, which if I decided to stop before getting my degree, I still had those certifications that I got along the way. So I love that with the IT programs that Western Governors University has. So my experience was great.
That's incredible. So that said, I'm gonna definitely promote it. I mean, whenever somebody asks me about it, I'll reference everything you just told me. And somebody said mandatory hands-on should be a requirement for passing. That sounds like a great program. It does sound like an awesome program. That's incredible. The mentorship thing that blew me away. Thank you for sharing that experience. So for those of you joining me late on TikTok, on Instagram, on wherever you happen to be watching this, I've got Will Reed, who is an entrepreneur, a coach, a cybersecurity coach, a speaker, and he is the host of a podcast called Tech in Motion. He is the CEO of Better Everyday Cyber. If you want to know more about Will Reed, link is in description below. Let's continue this. Now, I get a lot of questions and comments and stuff like that. I will get to those, but I have a few more questions I've got to be selfish here. Got my own questions I want to ask Will. Actually, this one comes from TikTok. Somebody said, what is a good way to pivot from tech to GRC? And I'm assuming that what you mean is you're in a technical role. Maybe you're a firewall administrator. Maybe you are a network engineer, and you want to go ahead and start doing governance, risk, and compliance, where it's more documentation and doing policy work and things like that. Will, do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, I do. So when it comes to pivoting from IT to security, one of the things is within organizations, like a lot of times your roles are compartmentalized. So you have an IT, especially in larger organizations, you have the IT team, you got the help desk, you got the tier 2 system administrators that are working on your servers and your network devices. But what you also usually have is some security specialists, or the person that handles compliance in your organization. So they're the ones that are walking around. They're the ones that are really annoying you and asking you for like, hey, like, where's your documentation? We got this audit coming up. I need screenshots of all your configurations. Pull up Active Directory, pull up your group policy. Take screenshots. This person needs access. Create an account for this IA guy or this information security auditor that's going to come in and view your stuff, right? So a lot of that could be annoying, especially if you're like me. I was very, very technical and very hands-on. So a lot of that stuff, I'm like, that's annoying. I got to go take screenshots, or you got to every year when you're in the DoD, or every 3 years, you'll have to recertify your systems accreditation. And so you have to pause what you're doing, have to assign somebody to sit and gather all the evidence, all your documentation. Yeah. And it's annoying when you're a person that just wants to get stuff done. You just want to fix stuff, just want to configure stuff. You just want to get everything connected.
Right.
What I'll say is that's an opportunity to volunteer to be the one that is going through those audits, to do those configuration validations, to gather up that documentation and be able to sit with that auditor. And it sounds so uber boring to sit with an auditor, go through, okay, pull up your Active Directory. What account did you use to log into that? Okay, show me did that have MFA on it? Yeah, okay, was that a Google Authenticator? Or was so going through all of that is sometimes annoying, but I would say if you want to break into cyber, doing some of those things that's a little more monotonous, a little less sexy, I think that's a great way to break in, because nobody's volunteering for that. I promise you, nobody's volunteering for that. So that's one thing, right? And then the second thing is when you see some of those security related issues, maybe you're a help desk person, and you know that when you connect this port, that you have to connect a system physically. You got to take that Cat5 cable and connect it to a port, and that port is locked. And you know that your network team does the port security. And so you got to contact them like, hey, I just connected the port. Can you guys unlock it? Actually literally go to where they are. And so like, hey, can you show me whenever I put that, like all I see is the blinky lights start to go from amber to green and start blinking when you do that. But I want to see what you configure on your side so that I can understand it a little better. And then usually they're willing to just absolutely show you what they're doing. You go over the shoulder and take a look at that. So I think those are a couple of ways. And then volunteering to update documentation. Ooh, when you talk about painful, and you want to talk about like nighttime, I'm bored or I need to get some sleep and I'm not sleepy. Instead of turning on Netflix, pull out a information security policy for your organization and start reading through it. Oh my Lord, like that can put you to sleep immediately. But another challenge is usually at least every year, if not whenever there's a major change in the organization, you'll have to update your information security policy. And there are different types of policies as well that you may have to update. And so being the one that's like, hey, like, can I go ahead and do an initial review to figure out, because you'll know some of the things that you're doing, because the goal is to marry up what your policies and your procedures are saying and figuring out if there's a significant enough deviation based off of what you're doing. You might have implemented a new solution, another technology that has taken a different route on how you're accomplishing requirements, and you may have to change some verbiage around. So you might be like, oh yeah, I know how we do that. Updating verbiage and updating security policies. Again, most people are. I'll even say myself. When I was an IT director, I had managers under me. I definitely had them take, like, I need you three to look at these 6 sections of the information security policy or these 3 policies, and then give me your edits, and then I'll review your edits. So that's something that takes like anywhere from hours to even like a couple of weeks, depending on how big those are. And nobody's kicking down the door to want to do those things. So I would say those would be my recommendations on trying to break in, get familiarity within your own organization. Then when they see value and they see you volunteering, when they see you jumping at things that people are kind of pushing off and getting the Heisman on, that opens up doors for you. So when they have openings, when they start expanding, or when somebody needs to move out, because what you'll find too is within the security space, people are job hopping, right? They'll be in one space for 6 months to a year. They'll get that skill set. They'll get that particular experience, and then they'll use that to leverage themselves, or they might just get tired, or again, life happens, that different conditions happen, and they want to move on to a different role. That creates an opening. Or when they grow and they're looking for, like, hey, we need some more security. Like, hey, who's that guy from the help desk that always was volunteering for security stuff and loved doing third-party risk checklists and questionnaires, and like he was the one volunteering for the questionnaire to get filled out. Yeah, bring him in. Let's interview him and see if he's a good fit. I think he'd be good. He's a problem solver, and he wasn't even getting paid for that stuff. He's an IT guy. So I'd recommend those things.
Absolutely. And to piggyback on what Will's saying is documentation is a real big part of governance, risk, and compliance. If you can be a part of the risk portion, that's the auditing, assessments. If you can jump in whenever those assessments are happening. If you've been doing IT for any amount of time, you've gotten exposure to a lot of the best security practices. If you understand how those benefit the organization, because from a GRC perspective, we have to look at things from a bigger picture. It's not just in the weeds doing one thing. We're not playing whack-a-mole all day. We are looking at the big picture. So that's documentation. That's continuous monitoring. You want to be a part of those types of things. And the more you can put that stuff you can put on your resume, the more it's going to help you out. And I want to, it actually a segue into another question I have for Will, which is about what is your approach to risk management in an organization? What kind of frameworks and tools do you use? Because this is another thing that can help you to get into GRC if you happen to be in IT.
Yeah, great question. And one of my go-tos is the NIST cybersecurity framework. I think that one is a framework that allows you to scale regardless of the organization size. So that it's applicable for organizations that don't have a security program, that are small, but also to bigger enterprises, right? And so that's one of the ones where it has maturity levels baked into it, to where, like, you might start off at a level 0-1 where you don't have any documentation, you don't have no risk assessment, no information security policies, no information security personnel, no incident response plan, no third-party risk management. You don't have any of that stuff. And like this cybersecurity framework gives you the ability to not only identify where the gaps are, but also, if you start going through each one of those functions, then it helps you build out your security program, right? And then so that's one. So that's the framework I use. Mm-hmm. And then the approach to risk management is, once you've identified what those gaps are, once you've identified different vulnerabilities, once you've identified where your organization may be lacking in certain implementation, I also recommend prioritizing and categorizing your risk. So starting with the most critical risk and the low-hanging fruit, those two things, and then working your way down. So categorizing your risk. Hey, what's the difference between something that is low risk versus critical, right? It's something, I'll give you an example. If you have a vulnerability, if anybody's familiar with the CVEs, a lot, like 2 or 3 times a week, you get a new CVE. There's a new vulnerability that has been identified. It means that somebody can do some remote code execution, which means they can go from their workstation and then somehow get into another network without having to and actually execute code and commands on a network. And a lot of times without authentication, like, hey, unauthenticated code, remote code execution, right? And so that's a vulnerability, and it's with Microsoft Windows Server 2012 or 2016. And then it'll usually come with a remediation recommendation. And so, and it'll give it a rating, right? And so that rating, remote code execution, especially if it's being remote code execution unauthenticated, that's usually like a 9.8. So that's out of a scale of 1 to 10, that's pretty bad. And so that's where you go, like, hey, if we have that in our organization, we are running Windows Server 2012 in our organization, we need to jump on this and make sure that we get this patched immediately. That's critical. And especially if that's, for example, a lot of Windows servers are doing authentication, or you might be doing hosting a VPN service or a web-based service that is hosting a website or something like that. If it's public facing, you need to jump on that immediately. That means anybody can hit your server and then has a vulnerability. Like, jump on that immediately, stop what you're doing, do not pass go, do not collect $200, go straight to fix
Right.
that, right? And so, but if you have something that's, maybe an internal workstation where, maybe you log in locally and the password is a 8-character only, I only hit, all lowercase letters and it's 8 characters. Okay, that's an issue, but that's not a major thing. It's not publicly facing. It's not hosting any major services. So when I weigh the two together, do I fix that externally facing server that has a 9.8 CVE vulnerability sitting on it, or do I face basically what's considered a low risk on a workstation that's sitting on somebody's desk that probably only gets logged into 2 or 3 times a week or something like that? It's internally facing, not hosting anything. That's a low risk. I'm going to start with the critical, and then I'm going to work my way down, and then eventually I'm going to get to the lows if I have time. But what I know is, whatever I had time to, and this is really critical too, when it comes to risk management, it is the availability of risk resources to accomplish the risk mediation task. So an IT team, especially when you're talking about small business, usually a lot of times there isn't a security practitioner that is dedicated to security, right? Usually it's an IT guy or 2 or 3 guys that also have to do security on top of all their IT and infrastructure support. So their ability to have enough time to address all vulnerabilities, all risks from an IT perspective and from a security perspective is really limited. So you have to prioritize things so that you're hitting what's the most risk, what's the biggest impact, what is going to impact my business the most, and start there. And then if I eventually get to some of those other things that are lower risk, I do great. That's all great. But at least I focus on the things that matter.
Absolutely. Prioritization is huge. And you basically have to, especially the more risks that you have, the more systems, more assets you have, the bigger the organization, the more you absolutely have to prioritize. I mean, it's a must. All right. I've got, thank you, Larry, for that. I appreciate you. He says, shout out, brother Will Reed. Good to see you guys in these cyber streets. It says, love to see you two platforms collaborating. Can you guys speak on the power of networking in cyber? It's really important. One of the organizations that I started out with when I started getting deeper into cybersecurity is ISSA, and they have one in just about every city. If you start to collaborate, we're not talking about network engineering or labs, I'm talking about actually talking to human beings. So if you go to your local ISSA chapter, you'll meet all people, all walks of life in IT and cybersecurity and GRC, and you'll be able to talk to about a level up in jobs, talk to vendors about different solutions they have for your organization. And it doesn't cost that much money. So it's definitely important. One of the real good things about school is you'll have peers and stuff that will be getting in these other jobs. They can pull you along with them. I've had peers speak highly of me and get me jobs and things. Networking is super important in cybersecurity and in IT in general. So that's how it's helped me out. And those are some resources that you can do to network. It is very important. You can speak to this one.
Yeah, Bruce, those are some excellent recommendations and insights. So I 100% agree with you. So the name of my company is Better Everyday Cyber. And I came up with that really by accident. So a lot of people would ask, just give the normal greeting. Hey, how's everything going? How you doing? And so when I got into the private sector, I felt imposter syndrome, number one. And because I went from military, regimented, those types of things, an IT services manager. Then I went to a deeply GRC role within the TSA and the Secret Service on those contracts I was supporting. And then straight into direct point of contact. I'm the one that's building security programs, right? And so if you're anything about just general compliance work with the DoD or with government sectors, you have a very narrow role most times in organizations. You're not building out the full security program because the security program is already built, right? You're just coming in to make sure all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed when you're coming in as a compliance specialist. Fast forward, I go into the private sector and I'm immediately, hey, this manufacturing firm does not have a security program. Go, Will, help them build their program. And I was like, what? So having to do that, I had a lot of imposter syndrome. Now, like the resources that I had, and this is where I'll go back to finding people like Bruce, and then finding other people like Gerald Ozier that had YouTube channels where they were talking specifically about GRC. I was able to leverage their knowledge, their insights, their content that they created in order to help me get a better grasp on how to build a security program, how to approach an organization that may be less mature than what I experienced with the Army or with and I'll say this about like the TSA. The TSA is a pretty young organization from a government perspective. They're only like, they got established like after 9/11. So they're not that old. So when I was working for them, a lot of things were in flux in terms of like they had been doing things, but a lot of things that I had been conditioned to believe that were like hard set, very, very like this is how we do things. There's a little bit more fluid in the TSA because they were kind of still working through some kinks because they hadn't been around for that long in the grand scheme of like the full government federal space, right? So coming from that, building a network of people that you can reach into, like, and I didn't have conversations with Bruce or Gerald during those time frames, right? But I was able to leverage what they had posted on YouTube, right? What I had seen on their websites, right? I was able to leverage those. So that's a way to do like virtual networking in terms of virtual mentorship where you're not directly engaging to. The second thing I'll say is, you will never, no matter how long you're in this industry, no matter how long you're in cybersecurity, no matter how long you're in GRC, you will not know everything. There are so many frameworks out there, and then things change a little less frequently from a GRC perspective when we're talking about, and Bruce did an excellent job. If y'all, like, I'm not going to go that deep into it like he did last week, but all the compliance frameworks, they usually do a revision every 3-4 years, something like that. So that amount of change doesn't happen as frequently. However, technology changes. So how you implement that and how you integrate those new technology integrations, those new technology advancements into risk management, and how do you then apply appropriate controls and security measures to address that? You still have to be in a constant state of learning. There are other things, just like staying on top of CVs. New CVs come out every week. So understanding new threat actors and what their methodologies are and what they're targeting, who they're targeting, how they're targeting, and then what the impacts are, what different types of phishing attacks are out there because they change with the seasons. So if you're operating off of stale knowledge, you need to network in order to build your learning. So I started off with saying like better every day, like what that means, right? So I was so overwhelmed in that private sector that like every day I was learning something new. Right. And so I was like, they started asking me how I was doing every day. I'm like, I'm better every day. It's like, what? Like, that's a very interesting perspective. I like that. I learn something new every day. So I'm getting better every single day. So that has to be the perspective. Nice. And you have to look at networking as an opportunity for you to get better every day by leveraging people that are in industry, that are in sectors, that are in niches that you're not familiar with, so that when you have questions, because if you're building a program for, especially on the private sector, sometimes things bleed over. You don't have a one security framework that you're working on. Usually you got different ones you have to pull on. So this cybersecurity framework might be my foundation, but I might also be processing cardholder data, so credit card information. So I might have to pull in PCI DSS controls. I might have personal health information that I'm using, right? That I might have access to, that our organization has access to. So I need to have HIPAA controls in, right? So and you might not be a deep HIPAA expert, but having access to people that are in those industries that specialize in those capabilities, that have experience in those spaces, that's very key. And this last thing I'll say, like if you're coming from an IT background and you're used to just being on your system in your cubby hole somewhere down in the server dungeon room or in the network closet somewhere configuring stuff, you don't have to talk to anybody. You have to break out of that, like just being self-sufficient. All I do is I configure these things and it either works or it does. Just, hey, talk to me when stuff is broken. Right. You got to get out of that, got to get interface with people and then build up that rapport with other people, network, go to other events where people are talking about different things, and then broaden your horizons where things you may not be directly familiar with. Always be in a state of learning and growth.
Yes, man, that was great. Like that. My next question was why did you start Better Bit? I think you you answered that question. Better Everyday Cybersecurity Solutions. If you guys are joining me late on TikTok, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, wherever you happen to be watching me, I've got the honor of speaking to Will Reed, who is a CEO and entrepreneur and the host of a podcast called Tech in Motion, and he is giving us some of his time, his knowledge, and let me ask my next question. My biggest question for you, like as soon as I saw your site, and I'm like, I was jealous, man. I was like, this site is really good, man. I was
I
going through. I was like, damn,
appreciate it.
this is. I gotta up my game. This man is. He's not playing it right. He's not playing games here. If you guys are interested in interfacing with Will Reed, look at the link in description below. Let me see. So my question was, what are your challenges, your biggest challenges being an entrepreneur?
This is such a good question. And this is one of those things where it is a completely different mindset to be an entrepreneur versus somebody that has a 9 to 5 job where you've been hired, you're a W-2 or even a 1099 employee. Usually you're doing one thing and the infrastructure that you're falling in on is already built. So I'll use my latest like my last private sector job. So this was a company based out of the Midwest. Actually, I'll shout them out. Heartland Business Solutions or Business Systems. They were an organization that was they did IT services support, network infrastructure support, and then they also did cybersecurity consulting. And so when I got there, all their HR was already built. I had a full onboarding, had interviews, multi-stage interviews that were built in. They had all their accounting systems were online. They had a training program that was in place. They had, and that's just getting into the organization. They had policies and procedures already established. They had all the tax forms and all of that was already established. And then I got into my individual departments. I had some light training I had with the individual departments. I got onboarded there, familiarized. I got to side saddle with people that were going through different interviews, or I'm sorry, different. When I say interviews, they were doing risk assessments and they were doing interviews with different stakeholders as a part of that risk assessment, asking them questions, ascertain what levels of controls were implemented, how they were implemented, those types of things. So I was able to sit in on that stuff. All that stuff, the SOPs were already pretty much established. So and then they had systems where like they had all of our tickets, all of my work was all captured in a system. Right. And so you contrast that with when I started my business, none of that stuff was in place. I had to do all of that myself. And so like on the one hand, and if anybody's interested in venturing out into entrepreneurship, I highly recommend the book, The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. And he illuminates the challenge that we don't always see. So when we get skilled in a particular area as a technician, as a practitioner, so I got really good at building security programs and doing risk assessments and building out documentation. And one of the reasons why I ended up going my own route and starting my company is because like I live in the Augusta, Georgia area. And if anybody's familiar, last year there was a cybersecurity attack on the city of Augusta. And the city of Augusta is right next to a major military installation from the cybersecurity perspective. So on the Army side, the capital of cybersecurity for the Army is Fort Eisenhower, formerly Fort Gordon. And so a lot of the cybersecurity resources that are in this area are oriented towards supporting Fort Eisenhower. Then there's the Georgia Cyber Center, which is a $100 million facility that is geared around cybersecurity education and services. But if you look at the surrounding areas, which is commonplace in most areas, local municipalities don't have a big cybersecurity budget or personnel on hand to be able to affect change and be able to address cybersecurity risk. Small, mid-sized businesses as a whole don't have cybersecurity programs and cybersecurity personnel that they can have to address cybersecurity risk. And so I pay taxes here. My kids go to school here. And so when I see things like the school system maybe not implementing the best cybersecurity practices, I feel some kind of way about it. So I wanted the capability to be able to affect change in my local area. So that being said, I think being able to apply my technical know-how and then build a business, I wanted to jump right in to do that stuff. But in order to do that, I have to build all that unsexy stuff, HR, accounting, like starting an LLC and applying for an EIN, and then getting business checking accounts and establishing my own documentation. So again, I left that private job and built a bunch of products and tools and all that on their side. And then I had to come out and I couldn't bring any of that stuff out there with, so I had to start from scratch again. So that's a big challenge that I had going from being a 9-to-5 worker to being an entrepreneur. So like just the unsexy back end office processes. And then the last thing I'll say is, like, I want to be that type of voice and beacon for cybersecurity for this community, but also provide valuable services to people that are trying to break into cyber. But when you're starting a business, nobody knows you exist. And outside of common knowledge and like what you may think, building a website doesn't automatically inform people that you exist, because you got to do SEO optimization to make sure that you show up. And then you have to post consistently on your website, so you have up-to-date content so Google rates you, and so you actually show up on those pages. And then there's advertisement that you got to spend money to go and advertise. And then there's marketing. Then how do you create like all of that stuff has nothing to do with pure cybersecurity, GRC security program development. It's all the back end stuff. So that's what I believe, like, my major challenge was, like, transitioning my mindset from being what Michael Gerber calls a technician to being a business owner and an entrepreneur.
What was the name of that book again? Is by Michael Gerber.
Yeah, the E-Myth Revisited. Do I have that? Yeah, I do. I do have that book.
Okay.
So if anybody sees that,
man, I've seen that cover so many times. Yeah. That's wild. Okay, yeah, I'll just check that out. I've seen that many times. Man, thanks for the insight. I gotta say, you're doing a great job. Your site looks amazing. It's very professional. I see your podcast out there. You went for the big dog. You went straight for the doctor. You got him, and it's like, damn, man, he's making moves out here. So yeah, congrats on your business.
I appreciate it.
Let me see other questions that I have.
Here, I'm gonna pause right here. I'm looking at, like, my lighting. I'm looking real dark on this side, so I'm gonna adjust my lighting. Give me a second.
No problem. Okay, guys. If you guys didn't know, I've got Will Reed here, who is a CEO of a company called bettereverydaycyber.com. If you're interested in knowing more about his business, interested in jumping into his training, his mentorship, he's a coach. Link is in description below. And he also has a podcast called Tech in Motion. Check him out if you're interested in this level of knowledge and his expertise. He's a 20-year military vet. I'm excited to keep. I'm learning stuff from him, so I'm excited here to learn more. I actually had some other questions here, and I will get to questions. I see you guys' questions. I see people jumping in. I will get to you in a second. I will answer your questions. Will's been voluntold to jump in here and answer questions too.
Yeah. Hey, real quick, shout out to Larry Shervington, man. Like, we've connected before. Great question, my brother. And I love what you're doing. So keep it up, man. You're going to do some great things.
Yeah, Larry. Thanks, man. Thanks for all your. Larry's always on my podcast.
He has the best questions.
Great questions. Great questions, man. Larry, me and you might have to do something on project management one of these days. Let me see. So your certifications, I noticed you've got the CISSP, you've got CMMC, you've got one on PCI compliance. I get questions about certifications all the time. I know that certifications are kind of tertiary to your experience, but I just want to educate people on the levels of certifications, what they can do for you. And so in your opinion, like, what is the most effective ones that you've had, and what have they given to you, if anything?
Yeah, I'll back up a little bit and give kind of like my initial thoughts when I got introduced to certification. Then I'll fast forward to today. So
Okay.
as I mentioned, I was in IT services management when I was in the military, and a lot of the challenges that we had were, again, like I didn't have a lot of training on certain technologies and certain different aspects of information systems management, right? And so I'll just say that on broad terms. So one of the ways, one of my tools that I use, and if you're in the military and you're familiar, you can get the military to pay for certification training if that's part of your job. And so part of our job was to do IT services management, and then all you had to communicate was, this certification helps validate knowledge in certain areas that I need either validation on, further training on, or just need in terms of a compliance standard that I have to meet. So if you're in the DoD space, DoD Directive 8570.1 was the big one that required certain cybersecurity certifications to be in place for you even to do your job effectively or within compliance for the military. So my first cybersecurity certification, and I was at a level where I was a system administrator at the time. So I ended up getting Security Plus. That was my very first cybersecurity certification. A lot of people, especially that's CompTIA, they tell you to do that trifecta. That was the old advised you A plus, then Network Plus, and Security Plus. I jumped right into Security Plus. I got the certification. Then I went back and got A plus and Net Plus because I saw how valuable that knowledge was. So that being said, I used certifications along my career. I ended up getting, Linux Plus and some other certifications along the way, CCNA, because I had a gap. So if you do certification training, especially if you do it in a way that isn't in I'm going to talk a little bit about boot camps. Boot camps are great if you're already familiar with the technology, because typical boot camps are like 1 week. So they're going to breeze through a whole bunch of material really quick, and then get to the point where hopefully you can sit for a certification exam and pass it. A lot of people can do that, but what happens is if you don't have a good familiarity with that knowledge, that technology, that actual skill set, and that level of understanding, then all that knowledge is going to go into your short-term memory. You're going to memorize enough. You're going to get the test questions, exam banks, and all that. And then you're going to pass the exam. But then 2 weeks later, all of that knowledge, because it was in your short-term memory, is gone. Like, you're going to flesh that out. And as time passes, that you're not going to be as effective in that particular area or that particular technology as you would have been if you had been familiar with it and that was part of your everyday job. Now, that being said, again, I use those tools because we were using the technology. We just needed a little bit more. Like, we knew the Army way of doing it. Like, we sat on systems and they taught us, like, they gave us commands to do, but we didn't know what the background was on those commands. Like, if I put, switch port access, VLAN, whatever, like, okay, I can type that out, but what am I doing? What is that doing? Well, like, you're giving access, you're taking that port, you're putting it in a virtual network so that all the ports, all the network ports that are part of that VLAN all can communicate with each other. Anybody that's not part of that VLAN will have to go through a router in order to communicate with that VLAN. But we didn't have that depth of knowledge to be able to understand that's what that was doing. So when something went wrong and stuff couldn't communicate, well, like, if you knew about VLANs, you would know, like, oh, well, that port isn't in the right VLAN. Let me go move that over. So that's one of the examples that I use, because, like, you might get the certification, but if you're not doing it on an everyday basis, certification means nothing. That being said, I'm going to so let me kind of zero in on where I stand today. I think certifications, if they validate your knowledge, are great tools. What's king right now is experience. 100% full stop experience that you can validate by going through labs, by going through job roles that you've actually completed certain requirements, and then you've gone through and you've executed certain things as part of a job role. Experience speaks very highly. I'll say this about certifications. Certifications open doors. So if you're familiar with applying for jobs, the ATS system, that ATS system screens job applications. So if you don't have certain things on your application when you're applying for certain roles, you're not even going to get to the second stage. You're not going to get a call. You're not going to get an interview. You're not going to talk to the actual hiring manager or the department manager that you're actually going to do the work. And you might be fully qualified, but because you don't have a certain certification, especially in the DoD, where if you're applying for a job that is information assurance technical level 2, for example, you need a IAT level 2 baseline certification, which is Security Plus, CCSP and other baseline certification. If you don't have that certification, you're not getting a job. So experience is key. Certifications open doors.
That's right. Absolutely. I agree with that. All right, let me see. I'm getting a whole bunch of questions. So I'm just going to get into the questions. I'm getting a lot here. I'm getting buried. Okay, Sam asked, could you kindly elaborate on the distinction between doing a risk assessment for applications and conducting a risk assessment for ATO, authorization to operate on this esteemed platform? I can give you my experience on it real quickly. So I have done or been a part of a risk assessment for applications, like major applications, and versus like a GSS or a general support system. And so the differences are the general support system will be like it's a bunch of computers, a bunch of servers, workstations, be all kinds of different things, and they'll have a boundary. That boundary, when we're doing an assessment to get an ATO, and let me back up a little bit. So an ATO is a formal documentation that is created from a process where we are evaluating the security posture, the security level of a system. And then at the end of it, once all the security assessment reports are done, once everybody's presented documentation, we've done all the scans and everything, the head of the agency, the CEO, or whoever will sign off on saying, yep, this is good. I'm going to take the remaining responsibility for this system. And so it's authorized to operate. And then the risk assessment for one application, you might have a new application that your organization developed, and you're going to run an assessment to determine if it has security flaws on it. So in my experience, doing the risk assessment for one software that we created, they ran a script on it. We looked through it, made sure it was documented properly, the processes for them to develop that application was appropriate, everything was good, and then that was it. The ATO is a whole different ball game. That lasts months and months. It's a whole bunch of people working on the project. It's a ton of meetings. It is thousands of hours of man hours. It's night and day. It's two different things. It might include a physical security assessment, a wireless assessment. It might also include a software assessment. It's a whole bunch of things. And at the end, we get a document saying you can operate for 2-3 more years. And so that's been my experience, the difference between those two things. Night and day, two different things. Will, you want to speak to this one?
Yeah. But yeah, Bruce, excellent explanation. And especially on the ATO process, when you're doing a risk assessment outside of like an ATO, and we're talking like outside of the federal government, a risk assessment, if you do a risk assessment on a DoD system, and you determine that there's an unacceptable level of risk with this information system, either when it's trying to get an ATO, or after an ATO when you're trying to recertify the ATO or get a reaccreditation. If that system has unacceptable risk, that authorizing official could pull that system off of the network.
Yes.
Full stop. You fix this before you even come back and talk about getting back on this network, right? Looking at private sector, you're not going to tell an organization, pull your internet connection right now because your risk assessment is trash, right? you do a risk assessment for an organization, and especially if it's the first one, you're going to have a bunch of unacceptable, and the unacceptable is based off of the organization. So let me use a different term. You're going to have a bunch of critical risks, critical vulnerabilities that you're going to find for an organization when you do a risk assessment in the private sector. But you're not going to tell that business to stop all operations and fix this, and then call me when you got this done, and I will tell you when you can get this stuff back on. Like, no, they're going to continue operating, and then you implement your plan of action while you're operating the system or while you're operating that network and all those corporate devices, right? So it's more of an ongoing, like it's risk assessments are informative for private side
Yeah,
businesses.
perfect.
And on the government side, federal side, it is restrictive and like you're either at an acceptable level of risk and you're able to operate, or you're in an unacceptable level of risk and you're not able to operate. So that's one of the major distinctions I'll say with risk assessments.
Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, I've got more questions. Let me see. I don't want to ignore you guys on TikTok. Let me see. Got a few questions. We'll talk on TikTok until they close it down.
Oh, real quick, Bruce. I wanted to highlight
Yeah.
one of the products that you actually have. So if you guys have access to some of Bruce's materials, he has example templates of certain documentation. One of those is a security assessment report. So if you look at that security assessment report, that thing is in depth. It is detailed. So when you do that as a part in a risk assessment in the DoD space, in the goal of obtaining an authority to operate is one step in the journey on the risk management framework that you're going, like it's different stages. And that's stage 4 when you do the security controls assessment. So once you do, that's just one part of the journey. You can do that whole risk assessment and then still not get an approval to operate based off of your findings. And, so like that report is very detailed. I can do a risk assessment for a private organization on like a PowerPoint presentation that's maybe 3 pages, right? Like I can do that. And then an Excel spreadsheet that is like, 3 sheets, right? And it's not that in depth. I use NIST cybersecurity framework. It has 100-something controls. I go through each one of those controls, and then we're good to go. You do NIST 853, do a security assessment on that, and depending on the level of security that's required, like is it a moderate system? Is it a high system? You could have thousands of controls that you have to go through, which is why he mentioned I can do a risk assessment or a quick risk assessment on a private organization in a day, right? I can do that, especially if they're a small business, they're only doing cloud, they don't have a bunch of infrastructure. I can do that in a day. Interview a couple of people from the IT department, somebody from HR, bam, we're good. But when you're doing a security assessment as a part of the NIST 853, like NIST 837, that is a months long process where you're looking at especially if they're starting out, that's like a 6 to 9 month, if not 12-month process, depending on how advanced and how intricate and how many integrations there are with that system. So that security assessment report that Bruce has as a documentation, that'll just give you a glimpse at all the things that you're looking at on the ATO side versus something I can do on the private side.
Yes, it's a beast. And then somebody else chimed in and said, for a person who starts out in risk management doing ATO stuff for the government, no technical skills, do you recommend them getting a technical role to be more effective? What do you think about that, Will?
I think it doesn't hurt as a way to pivot in. And I'll say that what served me, and again, I was an IT services manager for the Army, and I was, mostly system administrator, network administrator, and then, just overall operations, help desk operations is what my bread and butter was. So I was really good with the technology, right? And so, and layering onto that, part of when I was an IT director, I had a section where they were responsible for information security. So they had to, so I had to know a little bit about everything. I knew enough to be dangerous. I knew enough to get the CISSP. I got that while I was in the Army. So, but when it came to, so that helped me when I transitioned, and I had to, I constantly say, go back last week where Bruce was talking about how to engage with other departments when it comes to being a security manager, right? So you might get a vulnerability scan results and see something. Well, you might not be the one as the security practitioner actually doing the security, or the security manager doing the scans. You might have to go to the vulnerability management team and ask them, like, hey, I'm seeing a discrepancy between this week's scans and next week's scans. I see a whole bunch of several more devices that weren't a part of the original baseline. what's going on there. Did we,
Mm-hmm.
did we integrate some new systems, or, like what's going on there with those systems that were offline for a long period of time and just got back on? That's why they weren't on last week's report. So you might have to get some clarification. But understanding that the difference between a server and a workstation versus a router versus a VPN, different types of assets, coming from a technical background, that does help to where you're not having to try to figure out what technology is in order to ask that. And then the other thing is, like, when I'm doing an assessment and I'm asking for evidence, I know where that department can get evidence from. So if I'm asking for an example, show me how you're doing identity access management and specifically your password management policy, where you say that look at your physical written policy that says that all passwords are 12 characters, have to be complex, a combination of upper lowercase letters, special characters, and numbers, right? You have that in your policy saying that's what you're implementing. Well, when I'm doing an assessment on that control, well, I have the documentation. Okay, you have articulated what the requirement is. Now show me that you're actually doing it. So, but if I don't have an understanding of technology, well, really what you do is you pull up your Active Directory or your Azure Intra ID, and then you pull up that group policy, and then you show that policy, and it shows like, hey, these are all the requirements for that policy. And you can see that, or you can ask them, even if you're not on send me a screenshot of it. And then you look at the timestamp, like, oh yeah, that's today's date, and then this is the setting. So I know it. But if you don't have a familiarity with the technology, you don't know even who to talk to, right? So you come into an organization doing assessment, especially on the private side, you sit in the organization and like you need to know, you need to talk to the guy that manages your Active Directory infrastructure, not your help desk guy. He might not be doing group policy work. He's just unlocking passwords and resetting accounts, right? So that understanding the technology, I think, is important. It's important, but not necessarily like you don't need it, but you do need to have a background in like an understanding of foundational IT. So even if you didn't have that as a role, doing some basic IT course instruction. There's a bunch of free stuff out there on YouTube. Professor Messer, A+. Like if you want to, we'll go back to like certification and kind of bridge the gap, right? So I wouldn't recommend anybody, like unless you're doing a pure help desk role and they're asking for it, to actually get the A+ certification. But the knowledge that you get when you're doing the course, when you're studying for A+, using the resources like Professor Messer, where he's explaining all the different aspects of the A+ exam and all the requirements and going over all the knowledge areas, getting that knowledge is what's important so that you're able to have those conversations with the technical side of things.
Yes, I would. First of all, I agree with everything Will just said. I do recommend that you do a technical role to be more effective. Do you have to? You don't. I've got peers that don't have a technical background, or they're not super technical. The more technical your background is, the more effective you'll be as a GRC person. I've got another question here that kind of piggybacks into this. Somebody said, "What programming languages do you know?" I don't know off the top of my head. I'm not a programmer. You don't have to be a programmer to do GRC. Is it helpful if I knew that? If I knew how to do a Python or something, it would be helpful to my organization, to my role, to my job, the current job I'm doing. Not really. I don't, so you don't have to be a programmer. You don't have to be an elite network engineer or a pen tester or something like that. Do you have to know technology? I would say so. You're going to have to know, you have to have the fundamentals down. And like Will mentioned, if you could just go through the parts of say A+ certification, like if you could at least know that knowledge, not necessarily take the certification if you don't want to. It's a marketable, it's not a bad certification, but the knowledge that you get from there is foundational. Like you'll need to know that stuff. Let me see if I have any other questions here. I've got somebody said, how can I transition from a SOC or a security operating center? I imagine that you mean an analyst, like a SOC analyst, to a GRC. And for those who don't know, a SOC is usually it's like a central command for an organization. Usually it's in medium to large size organizations where they're monitoring all the traffic and all the security features of the organization. They're monitoring they're looking at the logs of the entire organization and doing what's called continuous monitoring in near real time. And then they're a part of the incident response team. Like if they see an incident, sometimes they are this incident response team, but they're detecting security incidents or abnormal behavior, and then they're reporting it. And whereas GRC is stuff that mostly we're talking about, doing the documentation, looking at the big picture of the organization, doing policies, doing meetings to make sure that everything is going like it's supposed to. So the question is, how do you transition from being a SOC analyst to GRC? And I would say, just real quick, a SOC analyst could be a real good pivot point into GRC, because as a SOC analyst, there's certain things that you need to know that technically are going to prepare you for looking at the big picture. So first of all, you are looking at the big picture. You're looking at all the logs, depending on how they did the SIEM. You're looking at all the logs in the organization. So you know how many security incidents, certain things that are happening in the organization. You are a part of the governance, risk, and compliance. But now you want to get into the documentation side. Maybe you want to level up, make more money or whatever. Start looking at policies. Start looking at the documentation piece. Start being a part of the work instruction. If you guys have like a work instruction or a standard operating procedure, start helping with that. So, Will, what would you say to that question?
Yeah, I 100% agree with what you said, Bruce. I think that just sticking with the next step is, because I think on the SOC analyst side, you're used to reporting, and a lot of roles, especially if you're in a junior level role where you're not direct customer facing, usually just you're reporting that a notification or alert that you've either manually sent out or you got some sort of automation that's sending out to whoever's on that alert notification list. And that's it, and you're moving on to the next thing. Like, hey, I reported, and then you might do a follow-up call if that organization is mature enough to have, like, hey, if it's a higher critical, we need a phone call on top of that, email or notification to an app or something like that. But just thinking, what's the next step? So now you've either sent that alert notification out, put yourself on the other side of receiving that alert. What do you do next, right? A lot of that is those alerts would be, hey, you got some sort of indicator of compromise, and then it's showing that there's this vulnerability that's out there, or you're seeing a indication that there's a configuration that has a known exploited vulnerability. Mm-hmm. So when you're on the other end of that, receiving that alert, then now your job as maybe the system administrator is to go and then patch that system, right? Or validate that alert is legit and isn't a false positive. But then, okay, yeah, I do see that we don't have that configuration. We haven't patched. Maybe it's Thursday, or maybe it's the third Thursday of the month, and we haven't gotten around to patch Tuesday, right? Or whatever the next patch cycle, right? Maybe it's kind of pulling that in a little ahead of time, doing a service outage, and then like trying to schedule that outage, doing some change management, configuration management, and then getting that request approved, and then getting that implemented as an emergency fix, right? So thinking what that next step is. The other side of it too is when you do an alert, there's also, as part of like incident response, a lot of that is like, hey, who am I then notify? If I get the alert as a system administrator, am I keeping this to myself, or do I need to escalate this to somebody else? And so thinking of who we're going to escalate that to. Also, so like we talked about vulnerability management, we talked about a communication plan, a communication strategy, and an escalation strategy as part of incident response. So you might go from SOC analyst to DFIR, kind of like what Bruce mentioned before, to where you're actually going in. Not only did you alert and monitor on it, now you're going in and you're actually going to investigate and see it. How widespread is this indicator of compromise? Is it just one system, or is this just the start of things where I need to start shutting things down and contain this incident and isolate that workstation, and then do an investigation to see if other similar processes are happening on other workstations where the payload just hasn't been activated yet. So maybe DFIR, and then from a DFIR's perspective, that might be a way to do GRC as well, because you're able to manage an incident because you know all the different areas and all the different phases and what needs to happen. Because if you're in a GRC role, sometimes you might be the security manager, where you have to do all the communication with the other stakeholders. So not only are you then managing what your IT team is doing, but I need to contact maybe my cyber insurance policy, right? I need to contact my legal team. I need to contact the C-suite to let them know, like, hey, we might need to start talking to our public affairs, public relations, to let them know that there may be the potential of a security incident that is happening right now that we are investigating. And when we get a little bit more information, we'll let you know. But these third parties, these customers that we might have, it might be impacting them. So we might want to give them a heads up on letting them know. So just thinking up from a communication perspective, all the different departments, all the different stakeholders that need to understand what is going on based off of what you're alerting on. That's a good way to kind of start looking at transitioning.
Excellent. And then they say they're working for 3 years in cyber, 6 in IT, and you said that you have a Security Plus and an OSCP, which is fire. That's great. That's an awesome move. So what Will is saying, to piggyback on what he's saying, is you got to start looking at the bigger picture. Like right now, your whack-a-mole time. You're looking at the logs and saying, okay, I'm looking for that mole we're gonna whack. Like you got to start looking at the bigger picture. And you can do, I don't know, pen testing. You could do cybersecurity consulting, bigger picture. Now you're looking at the whole organization. How can I penetrate this organization? Like those kinds of roles where you're looking at a bigger scope for the organization is what I would do. If I was in your position, that's what I would do. Start looking for those types of positions. And you say you have 3 years in cyber. So right now you're probably in a stage where you're like, man, I don't know if I want to do that. I've been in SOC analyst. I'm comfortable with this role. You got to start thinking about, I'm going to have to communicate with people. I'm going to have to articulate exactly what I can do for this organization. That's you're going to have to break yourself out of that comfort zone. And that's where the bigger money is going to start coming in. It's scary to do at first, but you got to believe in yourself. You got an OSCP. You know how many people have that? Not many. That shows a level of skill that a lot of people don't have. That's not just a written exam. That's a practical hacking, if I'm not mistaken, right? Like that's practical. You have to hack some shit in order to do that.
You gotta hack in.
Yeah. So like you have a level of skill that you got to believe in yourself to make that next step and be a consultant. Like those jobs are out there. Just you putting OSCP and your experience level on there is going to open up a whole bunch of roles, but you've got to speak to what you can do for the organization. So that's what I would advise you to do. Let me see if I have any other questions here. Already answered that one. Somebody said, oh, here's a good one. I get this one all the time. Do you have to go to college? I assume you mean, do you have to go to college to do cybersecurity? Do you have to go to college to do what we're doing? What would you say to that, Will?
I'd say no. I did college because, and just to give y'all a little bit of insight into how my brain works, I am a uber planner. Like I will over analyze everything. I will have plan A, B, C, and D whenever I need to make a major decision or be better prepared to do something. So as I was transitioning out of the military, I knew I had the experience. And, along the way, I got the certifications. Well, like in my mind, I'm like, well, I want to make myself the most competitive in the job market so that nobody can deny me based off of something I'm missing. So when we talk about there are 3 major areas where lots of employers are looking. They're looking at your experience and your skills, and then they're looking at certifications, and then a lot of times they're looking at degrees. So these are like the 3 things that people like to focus on. And college degree could be a barrier to entry, especially when it comes to like some managerial roles. Now we're starting to progress into a phase in the industry where degrees are not necessary as much as they have been in the past. So I got that to check the box so that I had the trifecta. And so like, hey, like they can't say, well, you don't have enough experience, you don't have a degree, or you don't have a certification. I got all 3. Let's talk about some other things, right? So I would say, no, college is not necessary. And I would say if you're on a budget and you don't have an entity to pay for your education, as I mentioned, the military and the federal government through the Pell Grant pay for my college education. I do not have thousands of dollars, and I'm not a fan of going into student loan debt in order to get a degree, especially when we start looking at bachelor's degree, where half of your courses, if you go the typical degree route, like the first 2 years, you're not doing anything like related to your major. You're just doing your maths and your sciences and your social studies and your electives and all of that. You're doing that stuff, and then the last 2 years, then you're getting to your program courses, right, to where you're focusing on your major. So that's 2 years where, like, I'm never going to do calculus level math in any job role that I'm applying for. Like that, right. They're not going to ask me about 18th century literature in any job role that I'm applying for. But colleges, because I'm not going to go that way. All I'm going to say is, like, if you're trying to shortcut or get the most expedient path into cybersecurity, unless an organization is going to pay for your degree, I wouldn't spend my money there. I would focus on the free resources that are out there on YouTube. This is a great channel, ConvoCourses. Bruce's channel, Simply Cyber. There are a bunch of, like, you go to YouTube University first before you go to any other university. Get the free stuff. And then look at skills and labs that you can articulate and execute. And there are free labs that you get whole YouTube courses that are built around, like, hey, download this free invite, like go to get VMware. You can get a free license for VMware for 6 months, and you can get the virtual machines from Microsoft for 6 months to do a trial basis and go test some things out. Like, you can do all of that stuff. You can download Kali Linux and use that to do some testing if you want to do, like, penetration testing or vulnerability scanning and all that, right? Do that, but before you try to go the college route. I would say, like, make college like you're the cherry on the top. If you've exhausted all the other things, you have an opportunity to do that as well, and it's cost effective to you, and it makes sense on your career path in terms of, like, hey, your job says, for example, like certain federal government positions, you got to have a certain level of education to progress up the GS ladder, right? And so that might be an opportunity for you to leverage. And they'll have programs where you'll get some, either tuition reimbursement, or they'll fund a portion of your college education, if not all of it. And you may have to commit a year or so to the organization after you get your degree, but you're not getting at your own dime, but you're also positioning yourself for upward mobility within the organization because you chose that degree route, but not necessary to get into cybersecurity or GRC.
A few things that college and a degree will give you is, depending on the college, is going to be networking. You'll be able to network depending on the college. You can be a working student. You can do internships, apprenticeships. Not all programs have that. If you have the resources and the time to do it, not everybody does, then I would say go for it. Because it gives you those things. If you don't already have access to those things. That said, experience is over all that stuff. If there's a way that you can get experience doing this field, and like Will said, before you do anything, before you spend a dime, if you're new to this, go to YouTube and just start looking, watch other people's videos, talk to your friends and family. If they're already in IT, definitely pick their brains. You might not, this is not for everybody. So figure out if this is for you. If it is, and you want to invest in yourself, start buying some books, start buying books and get into it. If you have the time and money and resources to do it, go to college, do it. And somebody else asked here, is relevant to what we're talking about, is it necessary to have a doctorate in cybersecurity? No, it's not. It's not necessary to have a doctorate in cybersecurity. I don't personally know. I've met a couple and in the field that, and maybe that's just because I'm a GRC guy. I'm not working in a research facility or something like that where you would probably need one, I guess. I don't know, but I don't have any. No, you don't need it. Let me just put it that way. Okay, let me see. I've got some other comments and questions here. Oh, Larry. Okay, here we go. Larry says, thank you, fellas. Always a pleasure. With GRC being such a broad field, how do you navigate where to focus when looking for your first opportunity to get in? Is it NIST, PCI DSS, Graham Leach Bliley, etc. Like, how do you get into this field, I guess, is the question. I would say start where you are. I'll keep it brief. Start where you are. So you, Larry, you're a project manager. You're already on your way. One of the things, let me just explain like where I'm at. So right now I'm doing a lot of the stuff in the current job I'm in, working for the federal government. I'm doing a lot of stuff that you do as a project manager. I'm meeting with subject matter experts. I'm not super deep in what they're doing. I'm just managing what time frames we're going to get this project done. And I do have technical skills. I'm not using a lot of that stuff right now in this current position I'm in, and they're paying me pretty good. I'm working from home, so it's not too bad. Right now, what you could do is, if I were you, and I think you're already doing this, is start getting the knowledge, start getting the technical knowledge, do labs, get your security plus, start to get in the know and start to gather all your baseline IT information. And then you'll be able to slip in your, it sounds like you're already in a great position to start leveling up in this field. Start where you are, wherever you happen to be, start there. Let me go ahead and open it up to Will here. What would you say to this one, Will?
Yeah, start where you are. Number one, if your organization is in a current sector, finance,
Exactly.
federal, they have frameworks they're aligned to or standards that they have to adhere to. So getting familiar with what they're using and what they have to maintain compliance on will be the first area I would focus on, and that gives you two things. One is if you're not already doing it, it gives you exposure to something that directly impacts your organization right now. And if, again, like I said before, if positions open up, you've already been kind of, you know, sliding yourself into their graces by being curious. I think that one of the greatest skills
Exactly.
on top of communication is curiosity. So if you have curiosity about what the organization is doing and adding value to the business, because that's when it comes to compliance standards, because it's either a financial fine, or reputational damage because you've compromised some sensitive information, and yet now you have to make a public declaration and notify all your stakeholders and affected customers and clients about that breach. That's one big thing where organizations do not want that black eye. So that's a way. That's number one, to add immediate value to your organization. Then number two, if you decide to move on somewhere else, you can say you have experience with that, even though you weren't in that role, and now you can add that to your resume.
Yeah. Another thing is start where you are. To add to that, whatever industry you happen to be in has some sort of best security practice, has some sort of regulation that mentions cyber. Know what that is. If it's government, it's NIST 800, NIST 837, NIST 853. If it might be NIST cybersecurity framework 2.0. If you happen to be in the healthcare sector, HIPAA. If you happen to be in retail, working as an IT guy hell, maybe not even an IT guy. Maybe you work somewhere. Maybe you're a stock clerk in Walmart. They also use all kinds of stuff. Now, if you're that far away from IT, you're gonna have to learn IT. So I'm not saying you can start going from sweeping floors directly to like, you got to have the knowledge of information technology. But what I'm trying to say is, in that industry, Walmart uses PCI DSS for sure. And so you could start to learn that in addition to learning the basics of information technology. Wherever you happen to be, whatever industry, they have some sort of framework or governance that you can learn, and put that as a part of your IT knowledge base. Okay, let me see. Somebody asked me, am I a project manager? No, I'm not. I'm just doing a lot of the things a project manager does. I'm doing a lot of plan of action and milestones. I'm like a security secretary, basically. So I'm a security secretary. I'm not logging into anything. I don't have any admin rights to speak of. I do have to know a couple of tools out there. But let me see here. I've got some other questions and comments here. And we're going to end this here real soon, guys. So if you have any questions whatsoever, now's the time to ask. If you guys didn't know, we're wrapping this up, but I've got Will Reed, who is the CEO of Better Everyday Cyber.com. Check him out. The link is in description below. He's a cyber security coach. He's a speaker. He's a podcast host of Tech in Motion. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity to hook up with people who absolutely are in this field doing this work. So now is your time to ask these questions. Let me see. I'm on TikTok here. Let me see. Somebody said, I work in a school as a therapist changing to cyber. Okay. So I get a lot of questions from people from all walks of life, Will. Trying to come into this field because they see it has job security. Maybe they're excited by it. Maybe it's the money. I mean, I don't blame you at all. But now I've got somebody who is their therapist, and I imagine doing anything in a school is extremely stressful these days. It doesn't pay. It doesn't pay what it should, I should say. So how do you get into cyber? The very first step would be to learn information technology, learn the basics of information technology. Some of those sources that you can use will YouTube. You can go to YouTube. They've got some awesome courses online for free to check out. You might not want this field, so that's why I say go to free sources first. Check it out, see what you like, what you don't like. You got to learn the basics first, which is information technology. One of the things that you can do is go to the A+, CompTIA A+, has a breakdown of all the very basics that you need to know about information technology. You don't even have to take the certification. You can just go through all the domains and learn it and then go from there. That's going to be your very first step. I guarantee you your school has an IT department. If I were you, I would keep my job and go talk to the IT department and say, teach me. What do you know? I want to learn what you guys know. Those geeks and nerds will fall off their chairs to help you. I'm telling you, because they always need help. So that's one thing you can do. Will, what would you recommend to somebody somebody who's a therapist in a school who's trying to transition into this field?
Yeah, Bruce, you were spot on. That like I've consulted with a few schools, and what I'll tell you is there's never a cybersecurity person. Like it's just IT guys that are overwhelmed with trying to manage Chromebooks and
Oh, that's so true.
teacher user counts
Yeah.
to school.com or what was the other one that they were using commonly. They got a bunch of platforms that they tie into for their learners management systems. So they're doing a lot, and you volunteering to do cybersecurity stuff, like, hey, like, can I just help out? Like they would just like jump in, bruh, jump in, or ma'am. So that was a great recommendation. The second thing I'll say is on the privacy side of things. So schools have to protect personal information for kids, and I want to say it's
Right.
FERPA. Is it FERPA or man?
I don't
Yeah,
remember what it is. I
yeah,
think you're right.
I think it's FERPA. But so there's sensitive information that's associated with students. So talking to your admin office on what their policy is on how they protect that type of information, and the privacy side of things is another way to get a little bit more insight into what's going on there. So I think that's another potential spot that people might not normally gravitate to. And then as a therapist, the third thing I say is like there's a real big thing called burnout in the cybersecurity space, especially when it comes to like chief information security officers. So if you have the chance to interview, so as a therapist, I would go talk to the IT director and then talk to them about some of the challenges that they're facing when it comes to managing IT and managing the cybersecurity side of things. Because if something goes wrong, if there's an incident, if there's an outage, they're calling that network administrator, and they have to come in at all hours of the night, Friday night, Saturday night. They're having to miss meals with their family for dinner. They're having to miss, some people, like if you catch them right before a vacation, they got to call off their vacation. Like they're sitting, and they're the only person that has access to the that storage closet or the data center where you guys are storing stuff. They're the only ones that have access to a certain account to be able to do something. And you've got your incident responders trying to go in. they got to come back from their vacation. Like that is a hard, it's hard mentally to be able
Yes.
to manage that level of responsibility, and then how always being on call, for example, is
Yeah.
something that, like, if especially for me, I've been on call a lot of times, and I had to forego vacations. And I was in
Yes.
Korea, for example, when I was in the Army. I was stationed in Korea, and we had opportunity to go. Basically, I think the trip itself was paid for. All we had to do was pay for, like, it was a trip to China, and it was going to, you could either go to the Great Wall of China or go to, like, the shopping district, and go there. And the MWR, which is a mechanism that the federal
Wow.
government, or
Yeah.
military uses in order to provide a benefit to service members, either free or very, very low cost, to get
Yes.
certain places. So I think that trip was like almost all covered, or it was just like maybe a couple $100, and then you can get a whole flight to round trip to China. And so my wife was able to go, but because I was on call, I was not able to go. So I was stuck doing my job and my role. And so that takes a toll, where you're missing these memorable moments with your family, because you're all about, this is all about the business. So is the business impacted? Is the business functional? Are we able to do what we're supposed to do? And when it is not that, because you're the problem solver, having that on your head, it messes with your psyche, for real. So I think
Yes.
interviewing those IT directors, and just getting their mindset around there, I would offer that up, and then that could give you some perspective on areas to focus on.
That's a good idea. You could do a whole business around that.
Oh,
You could be a
100%.
therapist just for cybersecurity people.
Would make bank, because, like, so and zooming out to small businesses, or even mid-sized, or even corporate organizations, when these organizations get hit with cybersecurity attacks, they're looking at the chief information security officer. Even though the chief information security officer is not jumping on anybody's system and configuring anything, they're not the ones
Yeah.
patching vulnerabilities. They're not the one doing
Yeah.
vulnerability scanning. They're not the ones,
That's
like
right.
looking at their SIM logs and alerting anybody. Like, they're usually like the third, fourth, fifth person that anybody contacts when something is going on. And the life cycle, or the life of a CISO in an organization is usually it's like typically like 1 to 2 years, and that's it. They're out. Like, and a lot of it is burnout and getting blamed for stuff that they're not directly responsible for, but they got to go and put out that fire, or they have to
Yeah.
go and manage the public outrage that is coming at the entire
Yes.
organization. And then now they have to be the spokesperson that is shaping and helping the public affairs and public relations shape the narrative on what's going on, why this happened, and what they're doing to fix it. And it is a thankless job in a lot of
It's a
senses.
thankless
Again,
job.
like, you're not the one that's fixing anything. You're just the one that's, did you approve the policy? And then if that
Yes.
policy was approved, is everybody implementing the policy that you put out there? Like, you wrote the policy, but nobody's adhering to it. Is that the CISO's responsibility, or is that a management
Right.
responsibility?
It
Right?
reminds me of what happened with that with the Secret Service director. I think that they
Yeah.
had in
Yeah. The
front
director.
of she's taken the heat, but she's probably not the one who actually
Yeah.
put that. She probably wasn't the one that did the
She,
cordon or any of that.
she probably
So
wasn't even
she
there. She probably wasn't
probably
even there.
wasn't had, but she was in charge. So that's just how it is. It's very stressful, when you get in security. Like Will said, is a thankless job. Like they see you when things go wrong, but they don't see all the millions of things that you've protected. That's just how that comes with the territory. That said, it's still a worthwhile career path. It has been extremely rewarding. Not all jobs are super stressful. I've had jobs where all I did was write policies, and that was it. I came in, I wrote a policy, they paid me a bunch of money, and I left. I mean, it was awesome. I should probably do that again very soon. All right, guys. I'm gonna wrap this up. Maybe I'll take one last question. Let me see. One last question. What's that last question gonna be? Let me see. I'm gonna take this one from Larry. It's my last question. And Larry says, follow up. Private sector seems to be catching the public sector in terms of benefits and still leading the way in pay. Public sector seems to still offer work from home opportunities and work life balance. And I guess it's a statement. Would you agree with that, Will?
Yeah, I'd say that's there's definitely some truth to that, for sure. I know, like, the companies I've worked for have offered a bunch of benefits, right? So 401ks, dental, vision, medical. I didn't take them up on most of that. I did participate in the 401ks, but like I'm being retired military, I got a lot of benefits from TRICARE, that I get steep discounts in comparison to people that don't have a military or a federal background in terms of how much it costs for me to have medical, dental, vision insurance. And so I think so I've turned those down, and also gave me the ability to negotiate higher salaries because they didn't have to, like, it's expensive for these organizations to provide these benefits to people. And so me not taking those insurance in coverages gave me the ability to negotiate. Like when I was able to negotiate an additional almost $25,000 annual just by deciding not to take some of those other benefits, right? So, but yeah, definitely private sector, they're starting to catch up in terms of benefits because they know that in order to keep somebody, a lot of times people are really not looking at purely pay, but they're looking at, like, if you got a big family, for example, or if you got family that has existing medical conditions to where if they had to pay out of pocket, that'd be a significant dent in their financial viability. So
That's
having having access to insurance is a big thing. So private sector is starting to realize that as a retention and as a draw to people that are interested in certain jobs, and like, hey, like, what are the benefits? So I'd say that 100%. And then on the public side, like my sister is in she works for the federal government on the civilian side, and they've been doing work from home since COVID. Now they're kind of like in a hybrid type model to where they might have to come to work, 1 or 2 days a week. But work from home in the public sector is being an option, is I think a great for work-life balance. I know for me, whenever I'm applying for jobs or have been applying for jobs like that, like, it's got to be remote. Like if you're asking me to relocate, number one, or come into office, unless it's local, like, like where I can come in and do something like hybrid, or, I don't have to, like, it's like gas is like, I don't like paying a whole lot for gas, and I don't like being on the road a lot. And if you get stuck, I don't like the area I'm at, it's not real bad on traffic, but I can imagine if you're in some of these like DMV areas or like Atlanta or something like that, like traffic is crazy. So working from home, having that option to not have to deal with that. And that goes back to like just mental health. I'm like, people that are in traffic for all hours of the day, and like 1-2 hour commutes, and it's standstill traffic for several minutes at a time, and people cutting you off, and you got road rage stuff, and then like that weighs on your mental, and you start looking like me, where you got all these extra gray hairs, and you're a relatively young person. Or y'all can't see it. I'm starting to this hair is starting to grow. That's why I try to keep.
Don't give away your secrets.
Yeah,
hold on to your hair as long as you can.
try to disguise some of this thinning hair over here in the top of my head. Fortunately, I'm not a short person, so I get to disguise it. My wife's like 5 feet tall, so she likes me keeping my hair. But you don't see what's going on at the top of my head. That's crazy. But anyway, I digress.
That's the reason why I'm still employed. Is because the benefits, because the medical benefits. That's the only. At one point, I cut away and I had business, and I was doing all right, and the medical just destroyed me. So I had to go back and be in just full disclosure. That's the reason. That is the reason. And then as far as one of the reasons I stayed in the private sector is because work from home. Like work from home is, for me, it's if it's not work from home, it's a no. It's a very quick no for me personally. But so I agree with you on that one, Will. Okay, guys, that is it. I've been talking to Will Reed, who is the CEO of BetterEverydayCyber.com. Please check out his link in description below. I hope we can do this again sometime. It's been great talking to you, Will. I learned so much. I mean, wow, I'm blown away.
Same here, man.
I appreciate you
being a part of this. Thank you.
And you killed it. You absolutely killed it. I'm going to be repurposing the hell out of this video. And I'm going to promote you every time. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
All right. Y'all have a good one.
Peace.